Thank you, Senator Cruz. And I'd like to go back briefly to Mr. Mair. Your written testimony, you said that the science behind climate change and its effect on minority community up for debate. I'm curious, is the Sierra Club, is this a frequent practice? Areas of science not up for debate, not up for evidence and data show?
If you are relying on the evidence and data, the science, the preponderance of the evidence, are there.
But that's a different thing than saying we should not question that the Sierra Club has declared this scientific issue resolved.
Based upon the preponderance of the evidence, the science is settled, but the thing is that anything's up.
Well, I would note that even the phrase preponderance of the evidence, having been a practicing lawyer for many years, means 49, at least 51% is what the preponderance means. I would ask, for example,
the moment you walk into the United States Senate and demand that an entire field of human knowledge be officially declared off limits to public scrutiny, you have already surrendered the intellectual high ground. We are conditioned to view these committee sessions as predictable, slow-moving administrative rituals, where talking points echo endlessly off the marble walls without ever colliding with reality. But what occurred inside this chamber completely shattered that comfortable illusion, transforming a routine legislative hearing into an elite forensic execution. The witness arrived at the witness table representing the absolute pinnacle of institutional power, backed by the immense lobbying apparatus of the Sierra Club, millions of dollars in highly coordinated public relations, and an unshakable confidence in the prevailing media narrative. He expected a highly deferential, predictable dialogue regarding regulatory burdens and minority communities, fully believing that simply pronouncing a scientific question absolutely resolved would serve as an impenetrable fortress against adversarial inquiry. Instead, he found himself staring across the dais at a seasoned litigator who did not bring emotional rhetoric or broad ideological platitudes to the confrontation. The questioner brought the lethal, methodical precision of a veteran trial lawyer who understands that when an opponent builds an entire public posture on a categorical absolute, their entire defense is resting on a glass foundation. Notice how the initial pressure is applied without raising the volume or engaging in aggressive theatrics. By reading the witness's own written testimony back into the record, the interrogation surgically locked him into his explicit demand to end all debate before external variables were even introduced. Pressing a public policy advocate on whether it is standard practice to officially proclaim areas of empirical evidence exempt from consideration immediately exposed a devastating internal contradiction. You cannot credibly claim to be the sole defender of objective science while simultaneously demanding an absolute prohibition on examining what the actual data shows. That fundamental contradiction set the stage for an immediate psychological pivot where authoritative-sounding rhetoric was turned into a fatal trap. Seeking to project unassailable certainty, the lobbyist confidently reached for the phrase preponderance of the evidence, assuming the legal terminology would project absolute finality. But invoking a highly specific term of art in front of a former appellate litigator is a massive tactical error. In the rigorous environment of a courtroom, words possess strict operational boundaries, and defining the scientific foundation merely by a preponderance standard instantly stripped away the grand illusion of absolute consensus. Preponderance simply means 51%, the barest possible majority, a fraction past a coin flip. By deploying that specific phrase to shut down inquiry, the witness accidentally admitted that the evidence he demanded the entire nation accept without question met only the lowest possible threshold of legal proof. This immediate verbal slip completely altered the power dynamic inside the room, shifting the momentum from a broad philosophical lecture to a highly uncomfortable examination of baseline definitions. The moment the dialogue transitioned from abstract consensus models to unfeeling, objective measurements, the structural integrity of the lobbyist's argument began to visibly fracture under the lights. We are no longer dealing with highly flexible algorithmic forecasts that can be perpetually tweaked and recalibrated to project dramatic future catastrophes. The interrogation introduced raw, verifiable satellite data captured continuously over the preceding 18 years, establishing a completely independent empirical baseline. When confronted directly with this remote sensing record, demonstrating absolutely no significant warming over nearly 2 decades, the witness's institutional programming took over. Rather than engaging with the physical numbers presented directly to him, he issued a flat, categorical denial, asserting that the satellite measurements were completely incorrect and had been refuted long ago. That absolute denial was not a demonstration of command, but a catastrophic overextension that triggered one of the most remarkable real-time collapses ever captured on broadcast television. The litigator did not immediately pounce or raise his voice to highlight the falsehood. Instead, he allowed the weight of that flat assertion to settle over the silent chamber, drawing the cameras directly to the astonishing visual of a prominent national figure desperately seeking guidance. Faced with a fundamental query about objective temperature numbers, the president of the nation's most powerful environmental organization physically turned away from the microphone, urgently whispering with his behind-the-scenes staff in a frantic search for answers. This highly visible reliance on unsworn handlers instantly dismantled the aura of expert authority and opened up a massive curiosity gap regarding the true mechanics driving these sweeping policy proposals. If the public face of an organization advocating for regulations that impact millions of working-class families cannot verify a basic empirical timeline without an aide feeding them lines, the entire foundation of the testimony becomes suspect. The interrogation immediately capitalized on this visible vulnerability by introducing a highly specific surgical phrase, the pause. By asking the witness to confirm his familiarity with the term while demanding an explanation of its operational meaning, the litigator constructed an inescapable intellectual vice. The lobbyist attempted to navigate the trap by claiming full comprehension, only to spectacularly misidentify the concept as a mid-century cooling phenomenon from the 1940s. That profound misstep allowed the questioner to drop the ultimate contextual hammer, revealing to the entire room that global warming alarmists themselves popularized the term the pause, specifically to account for the undeniable reality that remote satellites were registering zero warming, while computer models were predicting dramatic spikes. Exposing that profound lack of foundational awareness demonstrated that the demand to terminate all public debate was not driven by overwhelming factual command, but by a vital institutional imperative to insulate fragile predictive models from empirical reality. With his command of the actual data completely compromised, the witness instinctively retreated behind the highly publicized shield of the 97% consensus. We are exposed to this specific statistic on a daily basis, presented across media platforms as an unassailable justification for reshaping the global economy. Yet when the interrogation directly challenged the integrity of that talking point by noting it was derived from a deeply flawed, thoroughly discredited survey, the lobbyist had no substantive defense to offer. The litigator laid bare the incredible irony of a public advocacy stance that instructs American citizens to completely ignore their own lying eyes and the unyielding arithmetic of satellite readings, demanding instead that they place blind faith in researchers whose professional survival relies entirely on securing massive, continuous streams of federal grant allocations. This incisive exposure of the powerful financial incentives underpinning the scientific establishment introduced a profound new layer of tension into the proceedings. It elevated the confrontation from a simple dispute over atmospheric temperatures into a devastating indictment of systemic bias and institutional self-preservation. Attempting to regain a foothold, the witness passionately blurted out that the planet is currently cooking and heating up, deploying raw emotional imagery to bypass the suffocating trap of the data. But the litigator immediately seized those inflammatory words, reading them back into the permanent record and demanding an explicit confirmation of whether that highly charged language represents the official, unyielding position of the organization. Locking the lobbyist into that extreme, scientifically unsupportable absolute set up the final, most devastating phase of the cross-examination, the demand for a public retraction. The litigator presented a simple, unyielding conditional that strikes at the very heart of organizational integrity. If the objective, verifiable data factually contradicts the explicit claims made under oath today, would the organization commit to issuing a formal public retraction? The sheer simplicity of the question left absolutely no room for rhetorical maneuvering. To answer yes would be to admit that their entire public campaign is vulnerable to empirical disproof. To answer no would be to openly confess that their mission is entirely political, completely divorced from the scientific objectivity they claim to champion. Faced with this impossible choice, the witness refused to provide a direct answer, choosing instead to repeat his concurrence with the consensus survey over and over again, like a malfunctioning program. This relentless refusal to answer a plain question under oath created an excruciatingly uncomfortable atmosphere, pushing the tension to such an extreme level that an allied senator felt compelled to interject, desperately attempting to rescue the witness by pivoting the conversation away from the data entirely. But the litigator instantly blocked the escape route, firmly pointing out that the witness's own prepared testimony focused almost exclusively on massive new environmental mandates that threaten millions of livelihoods, making the empirical justification for those rules the absolute center of the oversight mandate. Concluding the interrogation with quiet, absolute finality, the questioner delivered a verdict that echoes far beyond the walls of that committee room. Persisting in a hardened political position regardless of what the facts show, regardless of what the evidence proves, and regardless of what the objective numbers demonstrate, permanently destroys the credibility of any institution purporting to serve the public good.